A national conversation about Australia's immigration intake has been sparked in Canberra. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott linked migration levels to stagnant wages, unaffordable housing and clogged infrastructure. Dr Liz Allen is a demographer at the ANU Centre for Social Research and Methods, and William Burke is the president of Sustainable Australia. They, I think, have quite different views on this, and they're joining me to discuss them. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having me, Patricia.
William, I'm going to start with you. Can Australia sustain its current immigration levels?
Look, we don't think so, Patricia. Sustainable Australia Party is saying that rapid population growth, regardless of whether it comes from high native fertility or massive immigration as we have right now, is not a good thing. Tony Abbott, I think, has been reading Sustainable Australia's website. It's having negative impacts on job security, on affordable housing, on planning and infrastructure and the environment. So we do need to do something about it.
Liz, what's your take on all of this? Because we're hearing increasing numbers of politicians now raising issues around Australia's immigration numbers. I think about 190,000 migrants come into the country, 18,000 refugees on top of that every year. Is that a sustainable number?
Look, I'm going by the evidence, and the evidence that we have at the moment suggests that what we've been running at in the last period of time in terms of immigration intake has been at an optimal level to maximise the benefits of having migrants come to Australia. But more importantly, I do concede that there is a point at which we get to diminishing returns. And that is, we've not got to that point yet. That's over 210,000 immigrants each year. So we've not exceeded that point where we've got too many people coming in. And I caution that when we have these conversations, we're often having these conversations based on emotion, in a vacuum where evidence is not at all used or considered in with regard to the population where we are now and where we're going.
So, Liz, you said 210,000 a year is the figure that which you think is too high. Is that what you're saying?
That's based on research that was done by Peter McDonald and Jeremy Temple. The range they've suggested is between about 160 to 210, 220 annual intake. And that's based on, as I said, the idea of a diminishing return. But anything above that upper limit or anything below that limit, lower limit, actually doesn't benefit the country in a way that we would hope it would. And that in terms of the age structure, we're an ageing population, and so we're getting to a point now where we want to avoid any adverse consequences of having a lower proportion of the population in the workforce contributing to income tax. So immigration has an ability to offset those adverse circumstances. So, but as I said, there are diminishing returns either side of that window. We've got to get it right, yes, but let's be led by evidence.
William, let's get to evidence. I mean, I know that you agree with when you're saying Tony Abbott's copying your views and his comments today that population growth is linked to quality of life issues. But where is the evidence that it's leading to higher housing prices, stretches on infrastructure? What can you cite that demonstrates that is why we're seeing these ramifications in our cities?
Okay, so evidence is really what this is all about. And if you look at Australia's historic average of permanent immigration, it's been around 70,000 per year over the past century average. Since we have ratcheted up to over 200,000, and that is, of course, 3 times the long-term average, you've seen house prices go from around 4 or 5 times multiple of income to around 12 times in our capital cities. You've seen wages growth at record lows. You've seen increased greenhouse gas emissions. Let's not forget the environment here. Greenhouse gas emissions are going up by roughly population growth at the moment. So the evidence is overwhelming. Now, what I must say about the so-called research that Dr. Allen cites is that it's based on wrong modelling and bad assumptions, because it assumes that as a population ages, workforce participation lowers, but that has not been the evidence shown in Australia throughout this century. A few decades ago, or previous century, a few decades ago, we were average age of 30, and we had a workforce participation around 60%. We're now an average age closer to 40, and we've got a higher workforce participation. So the evidence shows that societies adjust to these things, and just using this simplistic modelling that everyone between 15 and 64 works and everyone outside of it doesn't, to make these conclusions is wrong-headed.
Yeah, Liz, I mean, if I can bring you back in,
yes.
I suppose modelling can always be contested. Anyone who's studied research knows this. It's all about the assumptions that underlie the research. You've argued that immigration actually has the potential to improve our quality of life and to improve our economy. How?
Indeed.
Because I suppose Australians that are on, in crowded trains or feeling that kind of bursting city don't have that impression of what's happening.
So I just go back and talk evidence. So without a doubt, modelling has its difficulties, and they should be known. But what William's talking about here is he's assuming that correlation or relationship equals causation. Just because ice cream sales increase alongside drownings doesn't mean that there's causation there. So what I would want you to consider is that if we look at the evidence, and this is again, these aren't modelling exercises, they're pieces of research that have shown that indeed immigration does not. The net effect is that there is little to no effect of immigration intake on the housing market. That is, immigrants are not increasing your neighbourhood house pricing. That's not the case. In fact, if we were to cut immigration by half tomorrow, our population would still continue to grow. There would still be demands on infrastructure, hospitals, the rail network, schools, roads and the like. They'd still be in existence. What happens, though, is with this optimal level of immigration intake in accordance with the evidence, we can see that the pressure is lessened in that immigrants are contributing to the economy, and also make things more viable. Think about major infrastructure spending. It's done based on whether or not it's going to be economically viable. The fact is that migrants perform work, paid work, that either Australians are not skilled for or will not do out of preference. They contribute to the economy. The net effect is that having a migrant in country contributes not just culturally but economically above what the spending is on a migrant.
And William, if I can bring you in here, I mean, that's sort of the economies of scale argument as well.
Yeah.
Often you hear, for instance, and I was always, I've got to say, when I lived in Canberra for many years, fantasised about a very fast train that would take me home to Melbourne. And, living far away from home, you feel that way. And the argument against it was always, we just don't have the population to sustain this thing. When you do have the population, you can do those kinds of things, can't you? Isn't that the counter-argument?
Look, there's a couple of things there. I think Dr. Ellen and I would agree that migration is a good thing. We agree that multiculturalism is a good thing, but it's just the number that really becomes unsustainable. And diseconomies of scale is really about our major cities, Melbourne and Sydney. And because they've already been planned and built, and because basically all of the land has gone, to now try and retrofit this really complicated tunnels and sky trains and buyback land to build schools, we've actually reached diseconomies of scale, and that's why many of our budgets are in the red. That's why our assets are being sold off That's why governments are cutting down on welfare. So we've reached diseconomies of scale now because our cities are already planned and built, and the land's just not there. The very fast train is another situation altogether outside of that.
But it's the reason I gave it as an example is it's a basic infrastructure question. That, we want better infrastructure, better transport, faster trains. These are all the demands that the public are making.
Yeah, but we already had that 20 years ago. We already had that fantastic infrastructure. The very fast train modelling is based on a value capture outside of our capital cities. It's really based on speculating on land outside our major cities rather than actually more people catching the train. From Melbourne to Sydney. So that's a little bit of a separate argument. But we've reached diseconomies of scale in our major cities. That's a problem, and that's why we're going broke, and because we've got too much population growth too quickly.
Liz, I'll give you the right of reply, and then we've got to wrap up. I mean, you've heard that argument that this is... that your argument effectively is flawed because our cities can't be retrofitted. I mean, we can't go back in time.
The idea that we cannot build and see a future ahead of us that is bright for our children, that this moment in time is the end, and that we will not innovate and we will not be smart about the way that we're going forward, is a nonsense. We're Australians. We're smart. We're innovative. We look to the future and we will make it work. Migrants are a key part of our future. We should not blame population for policy failures. The infrastructure and all of those things need to be considered, yes, but at the moment we have a two-speed population where we have Sydney, Melbourne growing fast, Northern Territory, South Australia and Tasmania, they're wanting to attract more people. We need to be smart, consider what we want to be, look at who we are at the moment, and now imagine what we need to get to be where we want to be, and immigration features. If we want to hand the same well-being that we've enjoyed to our children and the subsequent generations, we will rely on immigration.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but this conversation, let's just park it because I know we're going to have it again. Thank you so much to both of you.